Are we alone in the cosmos? Mankind has long asked itself this existential question. It's a simple query, and yet it's one that has haunted us for generations. There's much evidence to support some theories, which conflict with other evidence, while countless opposing claims clamor to be accepted. But the quest to uncover extraterrestrial life has thus far only produced more questions and not provided any concrete answers. Today on Scream to Screen, we take a look at Ashtar Galactic Command, the secretive fringe religion that was inadvertently created by one of the founding fathers of ufology. Before we plunge into the darkness of outer space, make sure you subscribe to Graveyard Shift and let us know in the comments which true-life horror stories you'd like us to cover in the future. This story starts with a man named Frank Kritzer. Kritzer moved to Giant Rock, California in the late 1930s. It was named, as one might assume, for a gigantic rock that was prominently displayed outside a town called Landers, near the military base in 29 Palms. Kritzer, who was something of a would-be prospector, became inspired by local desert tortoises who dug holes into the ground to keep themselves cool during the blazing desert summer. Being a bit of a recluse, he decided to spend his free time blasting away at the bottom of the landmark boulder with dynamite, creating a livable mini catacomb for himself underneath it. Kritzer camped out under the giant rock for close to a decade. He spent his days during this period building a landing strip nearby, one that evolved into a DIY airport, averaging a plane a day by 1941. Eventually, Kritzer passed away, and a man who claimed to be his friend George Van Tassel took over the property and turned it into a fully functioning airport. Van Tassel, his wife, and his 3 children moved onto the land and opened a cafe, general store, and gas station. They ran these businesses from 1947 to roughly 1975. As if literally living under a rock for a decade wasn't bizarre enough, George Van Tassel claims to have met an alien being that appeared on his airport's landing strip in the early 1950s. He said this extraterrestrial took the form of a man who invited him aboard a craft that was 18 feet in diameter. There, he was greeted by 3 more men, each approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall. Van Tassel said the men appeared to be human, but when he asked the apparent leader how old he was, the being, who looked to be no more than 28 years of age, confessed that he was actually 700 years old, and that they had traveled to Earth to deliver the secret of time travel. This begs the question, what exactly is the most sought-after mathematical equation in all of mankind's history? The simple equation that would untether us from the cruel torments of time. F equals 1/T. Van Tassel didn't waste any time attempting to start a business to build the fabled time machine, but he struggled to accrue the proper personnel and funding. He spent nearly a decade of his life pursuing this goal. Then in 1963, Van Tassel had a second interaction with another supposed alien. Late one night, a man in a standard-issue Cadillac drove onto Van Tassel's airstrip. He interacted with and performed for 19 witnesses that night, attempting to prove that he was in fact of extraterrestrial origin. According to the witnesses in attendance, the man used a small device on his belt to make himself disappear and then reappear. George Van Tassel parlayed these claims of extraterrestrial contact into becoming one of the newly blossoming UFO community's founding fathers of fringe theories. In the late 1950s, he created arguably one of the most prominent UFO groups ever established in the United States, the Ministry of Universal Wisdom. This organization investigated and collected evidence of UFO phenomena, but more importantly, it interviewed great numbers of what were known as contactees. Due to radio and television appearances, Van Tassel had become arguably the most well-known promoter of the idea of first contact. He became a minor celebrity throughout the 1950s. In many ways, what we associate as alien contact, missing time, beams of light, and ships from other worlds is the result of his work. Later on, Van Tassel claimed to receive messages via telepathic communication from an extraterrestrial being named Ashtar. This supposed source of otherworldly information became the first alien superstar of the flying saucer age. Ashtar began to develop quite a following within the ufology world. People became obsessed with him, his backstory, and his goals for humanity's progression. Van Tassel also took it upon himself to reinterpret the Christian Bible in terms of extraterrestrial intervention. He eventually went on to claim that Jesus was in fact a space alien in disguise. The Ministry of Universal Wisdom reported that all of humanity has the ability to access a higher spiritual plane, dubbed the Universal Mind of God, which facilitates evolutionary processes. Van Tassel pointed to Jesus and Ashtar as prime examples of this. To make things even more interesting, Van Tassel eventually went on to claim that once an individual had mastered the universal mind, they could channel messages not only from Ashtar and other aliens, but also from deceased humans, such as Nikola Tesla. And it was while he was allegedly psychically communicating with Tesla that George Van Tassel claimed to receive a blueprint for what he called the Integretron. He described this device as a combination of alien technology and human technology that could extend lifespans and allowed access to knowledge from the past and the future. It was built with a series of donations from wealthy members of Van Tassel's inner circle and a sizable contribution from business magnate Howard Hughes. This only helped his rise to prominence among groups focused on alien life form research. In fact, Van Tassel's following within the UFO community became so large that he even started to hold conventions and weekly channeling sessions at his Giant Rock airport. These weekly channeling sessions would allow his followers to ask questions and then channel answers from extraterrestrials. These meetings eventually evolved into a single large event called the Giant Rock Spacecraft Convention, which was also organized by Van Tassel. It continued annually for close to 24 years. At one point, the number of people attending the convention ballooned to 11,000. Most of the well-known UFO contactees were speakers at the convention or held channeling sessions themselves, attempting to psychically connect with extraterrestrial life forms from across the galaxy. As George Van Tassel's following grew and cultural interest in UFOs increased, he would often speak of his connections with Ashtar, delivering new additions to the mysterious figure's lore in an attempt to facilitate humanity's evolution to a higher plane of psychic existence. Ashtar, however, did not stay a character exclusive to George Van Tassel's ensemble for long. He was quickly integrated into wider UFO culture. Robert Short, a pseudonym for the writer Bill Rose, who was the editor of the 1950s UFO magazine Interplanetary News Digest, also began to popularize the character of Ashtar. The two men had a disagreement over how Ashtar should be portrayed, so Short broke away from Van Tassel's organization and began his own version of the story, which he called Ashtar Command. Ashtar Command evolved into its own separate movement that had no definitive leader. It became a New Age pseudo-religion which incorporated many of the elements that both Short and Van Tassel had propagated. Involving a complex mythology of multiple tiers of alien life forms who were visiting Earth in order to assist us in achieving access to a fifth dimension, this new religion spread at a rapid rate. Then, in 1977, a standard news broadcast in the UK was hijacked, and a disembodied voice said this over the airwaves. "This is the voice of Rillian, a representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, speaking to you. For many years you have seen us as lights in the skies. We speak to you now in peace and wisdom, as we have done to your brothers and sisters all over this, your planet Earth." The rest of this lengthy and rambling message calls for humanity to put down their weapons and live in peace with one another, because a rapidly approaching apocalypse will only be avoided if humanity can ascend to a higher plane of consciousness. This bizarre and uncredited public prank caused a massive uptick in interest in Ashtar. Believers claim Ashtar, who is said to be the commander of an intergalactic fleet of ships, is tasked with propelling humanity into a higher state of psychic consciousness. But the faith is mainly concerned with the teachings of Sananda, whom they say is an alien, reincarnated on Earth as Jesus. While Sananda is the ultimate deity of the UFO-themed faith that grew out of George Van Tassel's ideas, Ashtar is the most prominent of the characters within that pseudo-faith. The group once again rebranded themselves, adopting the name the Ashtar Galactic Command. Continuing up until the mid-1990s, the somewhat disconnected groups associated with the Ashtar Galactic Command slowly began pooling their resources and attempting to align their stories. They slowly organized a channeling conglomerate in order to disseminate and populate their beliefs. They attempted to unify the movement by establishing a single authoritative source for all Ashtarian messages. This ultimately had an unexpected effect. There was a significant rise in the New Age spiritualism side of the community. After the combining of the disparate groups, they were largely able to iron out the conflicting stories and failed prophecies that had previously existed in Ashtarian mythology. It was decided that individual channelers espousing messages that focused on ideas like the destruction of Earth, conspiracies about extraterrestrial evaluation, and general fear-mongering were to be excommunicated, A council of true believers was established that had the purpose of approving accepted Ashtar messages. Ultimately, there were 12 guidelines established that would determine which messages would be incorporated into the ongoing Ashtar mythology. The main criteria was that the channeler who received the message must be operating on a higher level of soul. Today, the Ashtar Galactic Command is still a fringe entity, populated mostly by huckster New Age salesmen, wannabe prophets, and UFO enthusiasts. What was once a new and growing frontier for alien life studies and exploration has now evolved into a sideshow snake oil sales pavilion. Ultimately, none of George Van Tassel's predictions came true, and his search for alien life and time travel were largely fruitless. Still, his greatest creation has lived on well past his death. That creation? Not Ashtar or the Ashtar Galactic Command, but the united network of individuals fascinated with the possibility of life on alien worlds. Life that also might just be present here on Earth. Life that just might be interested in us. So what do you think? Is there a deep truth lurking somewhere within the Ashtar faith? Is this just a decades-old long game of telephone? Are the people currently in charge of this fringe cult really out to save humanity from an apocalypse and help us ascend to a higher state of consciousness? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe to Graveyard Shift. Leave a comment if you're brave enough. And as always, check back next time to find out what else will make it from Scream to Screen.